After the Civil War, African Americans were free. They could go to new places and do new things, but they still had problems. Many did not have an education. They could not get good jobs. There was discrimination. Discrimination means it's the same as prejudice, right? Or racism. So those are two words that mean that people have problems from other people because of who they are. So discrimination can be because of the color of your skin. It can be because of your religion. It can be because you are a woman. So discrimination means prejudice or racism. And prejudice means you just think badly about people because of who they are. For example, if I said, oh, I just don't like people from Australia, they're all terrible, that would be prejudice. That's me thinking one thing about a whole group of people. Okay, next paragraph. For a long time, African Americans lived in separate neighborhoods from white people and went to separate schools. This is called segregation. So separate means apart, right? Oh dear, sorry. Separate means apart. So the schools are separate. They are apart. That means one school for Black people, one school for white people. So one of the examples of that is drinking fountains. So like where you get a drink of water. So I'm going to show you that picture. So here is a picture of a drinking fountain, two drinking fountains. So here is the drinking fountain for white people. Here is the drinking fountain for Black people. So they had one drinking fountain for white people, one drinking fountain for Black people, one school for white people, one school for Black people, one neighborhood for white people, one neighborhood for Black people. And guess what? See how this is a big drinking fountain and this is a little one? Better schools, better houses, better neighborhoods, better jobs for white people. Worse schools, worse houses, worse drinking fountains for Black people. All right. 100 years later, in the 1960s, people started to change things. African Americans wanted the same rights, and that's things you can do, right? So my rights are that I can go where I want, I can live where I want, I can work where I want. Those are my rights. African Americans wanted the same rights as other Americans. They wanted good schools, good jobs, and good houses. People protested. Okay, so protested is where you say no. So we've talked about that with George Floyd. We've talked about that with the Boston Tea Party in American history. So protest is where people come out and say no, or say, this isn't right. We need to change something. So here is a bunch of people walking. They're walking, actually, that's a bridge. You can see it says bridge. This was 50 years ago, a little bit more than 50 years ago. And they were protesting some of the things that were bad for Black people in the United States. And actually, right after this picture was taken, the police and other people came and attacked these people, and many of them were hurt or put in jail. So they were not allowed to keep walking. And they beat them with sticks and hurt them badly. Okay, so that's protested. They marched, and that means they walked, right? So if they marched, They walked together and they sat in segregated places. So remember, segregation was where there's one place for Black people, one place for white people, right? So they said, no, 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 we're not going to do that anymore. So in buses and restaurants, they said, nope, we're not going to sit in the place for Black people anymore. And here is a picture. It says, an African American woman sat in a bus seat for whites only. She became famous. So here is the African American woman. Her name's Rosa Parks. She's sitting here where it's supposed to be for white people. And she's like, nope, we're not going to do that anymore. So she became famous. And these protests were called the Civil Rights Movement. So that means, just like for George Floyd and the protests that have happened, they didn't just stay in Minneapolis. They went all across the country and all across the world. This movement means that something happens in many places. So the civil rights movement happened in many places in the United States, not just one place. Martin Luther King Jr. was the leader of the civil rights movement. In 1963, many people came to Washington, D.C. They wanted new laws about schools and houses and jobs. They wanted to vote in elections. Martin Luther King Jr. gave an important speech. He talked about his dream that everyone in America could have a good life. So I've got a picture of that speech. Many, many people came. This is all people who came to listen to him. I don't know if you, as far as you can see, there are people who came to listen to his speech. A speech is a talk when he talks to people. So he was very good at that, and many, many people came to Washington. This is Washington, D.C., to listen to him in 1963. King was assassinated in 1968. And assassinated means murdered, right? So killed. King was murdered. We use assassinated for famous people. And we use murdered for other people. So we say he was assassinated because he was a famous person. Just like Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, he was killed, murdered, but he was a famous person, so we say he was assassinated. We use that with famous people. He was shot at his hotel in Tennessee. He is buried in Atlanta, Georgia. A monument in Washington, D.C. helps people remember him. After his death, many people continued to work together to make life better for African Americans. Now people are still protesting.